Thank you for checking out Real Talk Personal Finance. Shit's about to get real. Cash Flow King with you today. And in today's Financial Bloopers episode, we're going to talk about not monitoring retirement account cash. Before we get into the show, just a couple of quick announcements as always. We are still sitting at 44 countries listening to the show. So shout out once again to the newest country out in Italy. Also want to give a shout out and show some love to our U.S. listeners that are climbing up on the charts here in the different locations. So if we zip on over to U.S. areas, we have folks out in Lakewood, New Jersey, Indianapolis, Indiana, Fullerton, California, Ashburn, Virginia, and New York, New York, continuing to climb up the charts. So thanks to everybody out there listening to the show. I am using, for the very first time, I'm actually really excited about it, my brand new microphone stand. The old one, it kind of looked like Cube Crusher when he came to my birthday party this past weekend. It was pretty much all over the place. It was like a little tripod. It had two little legs on it, and they were always kind of crooked or leaning to one side or the other side. And I feel like sometimes the microphone would thump a little bit when I had that stand up. So I got this new one with a pretty solid base, pretty stiff and straight, and looks pretty cool. I do have a new pop filter on here, I believe. Actually, no, I don't. I take that back. It came with one, but I believe I used the original that I had. Anyway, if you notice any major changes to the sound, good or bad, please feel free to let us know. Quick email to the show would be fine. Also, for those premium subscribers, if you want to send any hate mail, because I realize we still have not got the Q1 quarterly e-newsletter out, and you want to send some hate mail to Cube Crusher, again, you can email the show, and I will forward it to his personal email address. And you can send that to realtalkpersonalfinance@gmail.com. We are hoping to have that out to you guys soon. Once again, apologies on the delay. So today's episode, let's jump right into it here. Financial bloopers, not monitoring retirement account cash. This was one, I have two really quick examples that I'll share with you today that happened recently and kind of prompted me to want to record this show. The first one is a much bigger deal, I think, than the second one, but unfortunately both of these are somewhat common enough to warrant talking about this on today's show. My guess is that you're going to feel like today's show was really, really dumb because it doesn't apply to you, or you're going to somehow realize that this in some way, shape, or form does apply to you, and you're going to feel really dumb for letting it happen. So, again, we like to have fun on the show, so take that with a grain of salt. But these examples we'll get into, we'll talk about the first one. This actually is a client of our firm. And before I get into the specifics, I want to just for a moment talk about some of the older retirement plans out there and how they were structured, and then some of the newer plans that you see more commonly today and how those are structured. And I'm not going to get into the nitty-gritty bullshit that nobody cares about, but the one thing I am going to focus on is what's called the default investment option. So more and more plans these days are automatically enrolling people into their retirement plan at work, and more of these plans are using a default investment option of some sort of target date fund or life cycle or lifestyle fund. There are different names out there for them, but generally speaking, how these things work is that based on your date of birth or year of birth, and the plan's what they call normal retirement age, which is going to vary by plan, but most commonly it's right around age 65. There might be some plans out there that are using age 70 or 70 and a half still. There could be some plans using age 55. But most commonly you're going to find age 65 is going to be the plan's default retirement age or normal retirement age in the context of the plan. And so what they do automatically, if you don't make an affirmative election otherwise, they will place your dollars, your automatically enrolled dollars that they start sending over to the plan for you, into one of these target date type of funds. And the way that they work is that they make the assumption, again, based on the plan's default retirement age, that you're going to retire in or around somewhere in that time frame. So if the default retirement age is 65 and you're age 55, then the plan is basically going to assume that you're probably going to retire in about 10 years. And we're recording this now in the year 2024. Most of these funds run in 5-year increments. So the next year would be 2025, and then they would have a 2030 and 2035 fund. So if we fast forward approximately 10 years into the future, and we're sitting in 2024 right now, you might automatically be placed into a target date 2035 fund. And that year, that 2035, again, is supposed to correspond to and coincide with the year approximately that you might retire, which again is driven by the age based on the plan document in terms of what they consider to be the normal or the default retirement age of the plan. So generally speaking, the further out that time frame is, and the larger the year, meaning the further into the future that year is, the more aggressive that target date fund is going to be initially. And then you'll be on what a lot of companies call a glide path, where you gradually become, or the fund gradually becomes, more and more conservative as you approach and then even enter into and throughout retirement, assuming you stay invested in that plan and you don't, roll the money somewhere else or make any changes. So more plans today than ever are using these types of funds because they have to kind of draw a line in the sand and pretty much come up with a one-stop shop for people. And that, for most folks, is going to be directionally correct. Now, I'm not going to spend a whole show talking about asset allocation and picking investments and pros and cons of that. That's beyond the scope of today's show. But what I do want to point your attention to is that in the past, these older plans out there were not always set up this way. They were not always using these target date type of funds. In fact, many of them, many years ago, were using some sort of money market or money market equivalent, some sort of cash option where somebody would be enrolled into the plan, or perhaps they actually affirmatively enrolled into the plan, but for whatever reason they didn't make any investment elections and they just had the money flowing in there. Then these plans would automatically just hold it in cash under the assumption that that person would go in at a later time in the relatively near future, and they would then go ahead and allocate their funds and choose where they wanted the money invested. The problem is a lot of people don't remember to do that. And that's what we're going to talk about a little bit here on today's show. So if you have an older plan, or maybe you worked somewhere forever ago and you had a 401k or some type of equivalent plan out there that you knew you were automatically enrolled into, and you saw that maybe money was coming out of your paycheck, but you really didn't seem to give a shit enough to look at your statement or create a login to the website and log into your account or get in there to actually choose investments. You thought, well, my company has this retirement plan and they're putting money in for me. They'll take care of it. They can see all my information demographically. They know, how old I am, and they can see, what my earnings are, what my income or salary is, and whatever. They'll just do what they're going to do, right? And unfortunately, that might not necessarily be the case. They might have automatically enrolled you in the plan, but they might have automatically enrolled you into fucking cash. And unless you have done something to move those funds, your money could quite literally be sitting there and rotting away. And that's what happened to this first individual. So this is somebody, we see a lot of different plans in our space, and this is somebody that had reached out to the firm recently. We pulled their account. They're actually 35 years old. They have just under $24,000 in their account. And this is somewhat unusual. They work for a company, and there aren't a lot of places that do this, but there are some. They work for an organization that provides an employer contribution, but it's not necessarily a match. In other words, this particular client did not have to put anything into her account in order to get these funds from the employer. In fact, she never did. she never actually took the time to enroll in the plan herself and put her own contributions into the plan and get anything like that going. She simply was receiving the employer contributions only. Now, this particular organization has since changed their plan, and were she a new employee, say as of today, for example, she would automatically be enrolled into the plan, and she would automatically have her funds going into a target date investment option, and this whole cash fucking thing would never be an issue. However, this particular person got started about a dozen years ago, right? So 12 years ago is when this whole thing started, and at that time, again, plans were a little bit different. They were not using target date funds as a default investment option. So the contributions that she was getting from her employer went into and are quite literally still sitting in cash. Anybody that's followed the markets at all, or just investing concepts in general, if you think about just having money going in over a period of 12 years, specifically the past 12 years from around 2012 right up until now in 2024, you can imagine how much more money this individual could have had that money been invested, right? But it wasn't. And so these, again, were employer-only contributions. The money market was the default investment option at the time. She apparently never took the time to look at her statement. And, here we are now at age 35 with $24,000 sitting in cash that was entirely funded by the employer and nothing from the employee. Now, you could make an argument, well, shame on you and shame on your company for not catching that or educating her or this, that, or the other thing. And that's a whole separate story, and this was not a client that was a client of mine at that time. So had she been, that would have been a completely different story. But anyway, we can only, pick up where we are now and kind of move forward. But that's the first real-life example of a blooper of somebody that, probably just assumed that they were doing whatever they were supposed to be doing with the money and that it was being invested. And I guess technically it was, but in all reality, especially if you go back 12 years ago, this person was, 23 years old? A 23-year-old does not need retirement money in cash. I don't care who the fuck you are. Like, that is probably not the ideal or optimal decision for you. I'm sure somebody could write in with an exception to that, but generally speaking, you're not going to see that. You're not going to see anybody that willingly and willfully has an allocation that either has a half a brain or has anybody that's talking to them about that. So that's blooper number one of the two that I'm going to talk about, and that's quite frankly probably the bigger of the two deals, the bigger fucking whoops, but it happens. And so the lesson to you all listening to the show is check your plan, check your statements, see how your money's invested, and especially if you have older plans that maybe you've left just lingering around and haven't done anything with, take a look at those statements, try to track them down and see, where is my money? Is it sitting in a money market? Is it sitting in cash or some kind of fixed interest thing? And maybe that's where you want it. Probably isn't, but maybe it is. But most people should not have, abnormally large balances just sitting in cash inside of an employer-sponsored plan, especially if you're on the younger side. So there's that. And then the second thing, this is actually somebody that I know personally who listens to the show. You know who you are, so I won't completely call your ass out, but I know you're going to be listening to this at some point. This person took the time to effect a backdoor Roth IRA. Okay. And so based on income limits and such, they could not make a direct contribution to a Roth IRA. If that doesn't make any sense to you, go back to the plethora of episodes I've done previously on Roth IRA basics and intermediate concepts. And I think I even have one called Don't Fuck Up the Backdoor Roth IRA. Those would all be great places to start. But anyway, they were looking into doing this, and we had a conversation. I kind of gave them some pointers in terms of how to do it and get it started. And I specifically said, as all the folks in the personal finance space generally do, I've heard this on other podcasts as well, but it's worth repeating here, make sure when you do this and you put the money in, you actually have to go invest it. Don't just think that you do the backdoor method and you convert it and now it's in a Roth IRA and you're golden, because you're not. You actually have to take that one last step. You actually have to invest the money into something. Well, I don't remember exactly how long it was, but it's been probably at least a couple of months now where the funds just basically sat in cash. And finally, this person reached out and said, hey, I don't think I ever invested this. I think you told me I needed to, but I forgot, right? So not as big of a deal, just a couple of months, whatever, right? They can fix that and get it started and whatever. The point is, it can happen to anybody, even when even when somebody tells you. So take this podcast as a to-do item on your to-do list really quick and go ahead and check your shit and make sure that if you've done either a Roth contribution or backdoor Roth contribution, or you have old plans or any of the things we talked about so far today, just take a look and make sure you don't have an abnormally large percentage of that just sitting in cash or a money market if that's not your intention. So this happens on the individual plans just as much as it does on the employer-sponsored plans. And quite frankly, probably nowadays happens more on the individual plans because there is not going to be a default investment election. You don't, again, if you have a IRA or an individual retirement account or Roth IRA, Roth individual retirement account, that's an individual account tied to you, right? And it's not sponsored by an employer. It is not a workplace plan. It is a plan that you are putting in place for yourself. And yes, there's qualifications to open one, but the point is there's nobody looking over your shoulder saying, hey, just in case you forget, we're going to put the default investment as this or as that. The default investment on a lot of those individual, if not all those individual plans, is going to be cash, right? So just make sure you keep that in mind and check your shit and make sure that you have things where you want them and you're good to go so that you don't end up on the financial bloopers episode on the Real Talk Personal Finance podcast. All right, that's all I have for today. Thanks again for listening to the show. We will see you in the next episode.
Check the mic and make sure it sound right, boys.